Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This session is for U.S. citizens and permanent residents who are not in the following departments: astronomy, chemistry, physics, psychology, or statistics. If you are in any of those departments, your session is taking place this afternoon. And for those of you who are not in those departments, welcome. We're going to get started. In today's session, we're going to have a brief overview, introduction of who we are and some other key characters that you will interact with. We're also going to talk a little bit about the funding disbursement process, what goes to your account, an overview of the funding, what goes directly to you. We'll review the things that are your responsibility, because although you're a fully funded student, there are some financial obligations that you will still need to make. We're going to cover the enrollment categories that are part of registration, which is something that might be a bit more unique to Columbia specifically, but is the driver of all of your charges and your actual designation as an enrolled student. So we're going to cover that a little bit just so that you have a sense of it. We'll also talk very specifically about the timing of funding and your next steps. And we should have some time at the end as well to go over some question and answer. So as we get started, let me just talk about a few of the people that you will interact with in your studies here at Columbia. The first is going to be the Director of Graduate Studies for your department. And while this is more of an academic role, they do also coordinate both with the Financial Aid Office and other GSAS offices, as well as the Departmental Director of Academic Administration and Finance, otherwise known as the DAF, in looking at fellowships, teaching and research appointments. So the DGS, along with your advisor, will be involved in some of those appointments and things as you go through your program. The Director of Academic Administration and Finance, or the DAF, is the primary contact that you will have in your department when it comes to anything having to do with your appointment or funding, opportunities within the department. They're really your first stop for information. And again, they will work very closely with the DGS, as well as within some departments, there's also a business manager who assists in processing funding or appointments. But we also will work very closely with your DAF in order to coordinate your funding from GSAS and other external funding and policies. For financial aid, each department has a dedicated financial aid departmental liaison. There are 3 of us. We do have linked right there the directory so that you know who those departmental liaisons are within financial aid. And as I mentioned, we coordinate both internal and external funding sources and ensure that there's a proper distribution of funds and compliance with both GSAS as well as university funding policies. Now, there are a number of other offices that could have opportunities for funding. You might hear about those through Student Affairs or Compass or our Diversity and Inclusion team. So not all funding and money communications will come from financial aid, but we do want you to know that we're probably going to be the primary source and point person along with your DAF in terms of any funding that you have coming forward. Now, overview of what funding is available. As you probably saw in your admissions letter, hopefully you saw that, both tuition and fees as well as living expenses are part of your funding package. For your tuition and fees, that includes any tuition and fees with some exceptions that I'll go over in just a minute, including health insurance for you and your eligible dependents, if that's applicable. For those of you who do have eligible dependents, I believe it's July 1st or July 15th, now I don't remember, when health insurance will open up the waiver information as well as enrollment information for you to add any dependents to your coverage, or if you have comparable outside insurance and are going to opt out of the university's health insurance plan, allowing you to do that in mid-July, by mid-July. And that's on the Columbia Health website. If you simply Google Columbia Health waiver, you'll be able to find that insurance waiver information. And as I mentioned, that will happen probably a little bit later in July or by July 15th. Now, in terms of your funding, you have 6 years of guaranteed funding. That includes, again, living expenses. So for all of you who are coming in as a first year and you're not in those departments that I mentioned earlier, you will be receiving for your living expenses during your first academic year a stipend. The stipend is paid in a lump sum at the beginning of each semester for that semester's living expense funding. So in the fall, because it's a 9-month academic year, it's split a bit unevenly because the fall is a bit shorter than the spring. So you'll receive 4/9 of the total semester or the total stipend in the fall and 5/9 in the spring. We're going to go through the timeline of when you might expect that to happen, but for each semester, any stipend that you receive, provided that everything is in place and you're registered, should disperse at the beginning of September. You also receive, as noted in your admissions letter, 5 funded summers, beginning with the summer following your first year, so summer 2025. That is also paid as a stipend in a lump sum. Usually those go out in mid-May. And so for any stipends as a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, it's a lump sum at the beginning of each semester or the beginning of the payment period, like summer. And for U.S. citizens and permanent residents, there are no taxes withheld. So the gross and net amounts will be equal. Now, that does not necessarily mean that this is not income that you should be reporting as taxes. However, it does mean that no taxes are withheld. And in addition, for U.S. citizens and permanent residents, the university is not required, nor will they issue any tax form related to the stipend that was issued. So we've linked right here to the tax information for students, as well as some more detail about the fellowship information that's available to you for your first year. But note that there will not be taxes withheld from the stipend, and there will not be a tax form that is issued to you for reporting to the IRS. So we recommend that you speak with a tax advisor or an accountant to determine the taxability and how to include that in your filings for tax year 2024 and 2025 for this academic year. We also do offer a tax informational session in the early spring, usually in February or March, just so that students have a better sense and can get some external advice. No one here at Columbia will be providing any tax specific advice to students, so we are prohibited from doing that for liability purposes. So we won't be able to provide you any specific details, which is why we're directing you to these other places where information is documented and available. So that's the information that's available about just overall general funding. Your tuition and fees will come from a financial aid account, be applied directly towards your student account tuition and fees. And so there is no action that you typically would need to take there as it relates to the covered charges from GSAS. Your living expenses, as I mentioned, will be a stipend that will go through your student account and then be issued to you via direct deposit. We're going to talk about signing up for that. And again, those living stipend expenses, 4/9 in the fall, issued in early September, and 5/9 issued in January for the spring semester. And that's the tax information. This is also a list of more detailed information that you can find about the breakdown of how your funding works over the course of your program. We also wanted to point out that there are a number of other additional resources and funding opportunities that you can have based on your individual circumstances. So you are guaranteed Columbia housing for 5 academic years. However, that is something that you will pay for, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide when we go over your responsibilities. So the guaranteed housing is something that you work directly with Columbia Housing on securing your space, and then you are guaranteed to have that for 5 academic years. If you continue in the program, you can appeal to request additional housing in year 6 or 7. However, it is no longer guaranteed by housing at that time. As mentioned previously, you have full health insurance coverage from the university's student plan for both you and your eligible dependents. If you have external health coverage, you will need to actively waive out of the university's plan. If you have dependents, you will need to actively add them to your plan, and that should be available by July 15th on the Columbia Health website. In the event that you needed to take a medical leave, your insurance would also continue, at least for the first year, for a medical leave. You can also apply for subsidies towards an optional dental plan, as well as there is a vision plan, which is not subsidized, but you do have also other health coverage that you can opt into. Those are voluntary and not automatically enrolled, so make sure that you review the information available on the links that are in this presentation in order to determine what action steps you'll need to take. For those of you who have children, there are also a child care subsidy as well as an accommodation if you are expecting a child and take parental leave. So note that there are just other opportunities and resources that are available to you that we want you to know about in advance. For many of them, you need to actively opt in or take some action. For some things, you won't need to do that. They're just part of your plan. So gym access during your funded years is something that you don't need to do. There are also other external funding opportunities that you could take a look at. For example, there are interschool fellowships that are offered at the university level at large to all students at the university. We have an upcoming fellowship website that is maintained by the GSAS fellowship team. So you can take a look at that. You'll also, as I mentioned before, get announcements and opportunities. There's a newsletter that goes out to PhD students that will alert you to upcoming opportunities that you can take advantage of for funding, as well as other opportunities internally for work or research. Now, your responsibility, as I mentioned, you are a fully funded student, but you are still responsible for certain payments that are accrued on your university account. The first being your rent. So although you have a subsidized rent and are guaranteed university housing, your rental charges are not deducted from any of the funding that you receive. So the tuition and fees are automatically covered, but your rent is assessed on a monthly basis, and you will be responsible for taking the stipend funding that you receive and making payment back to your student account throughout the academic year for your rent. Rent is probably the number one thing that prevents students from registering for future semesters because they have a balance over $1,000, which will create a university hold. If you are not a registered student for a semester, no financial aid can disperse, meaning if you fall behind on your rent in the fall semester prior to November's pre-registration for the spring semester and are unable to register due to a balance related to rent, then preventing you from registering for the spring will prevent your spring stipend from dispersing. So we want to encourage you to make payment on your rent on that monthly basis as it's billed. You can also, for some students, they find it more convenient to determine the monthly rent that's going to come out of that fall stipend and make one lump sum payment back from the stipend funding so that rent is covered and they do not have to be concerned about missing those payments as they go through the semester, which again would prevent future registration. So you do have options. You can make a payment from your stipend for the fall for the full amount of the rent that needs to go back to your student account once you receive payment. Feel free to reach out to your dedicated financial aid liaison if you have questions about that, and we're happy to assist you. Additionally, each semester that you're enrolled, you will be charged a $46 student activities fee. Now, the student activities fee is for your Arts and Sciences Graduate Student Council and other student-related activities that are created by students for students. This is a mandatory fee, so you cannot opt out of it. But note that while the balance to create a hold will be anything over $1,000, This $46 starts to add up, and it will accrue late fees if it goes unpaid. So note that you should also, even if you are not in university housing, be paying attention to any billing notifications that you receive, which will indicate this student activities fee. In your first semester, you'll also be charged a one-time $105 document fee, which is your responsibility as well. The document fee gives you access to transcripts for life and other online resources for the university. So note that you will pay that the first semester. For future semesters, if you are enrolled in a language course or other courses which have specific fees, so for example, many language courses have a $15 learning lab fee, those are also your responsibility. In the event that, let's say you did have a hold and you are not able to register during the dedicated registration period and registered late, you would be charged a $100 late registration fee. And that would be your responsibility as well. So again, keeping up with your balances on your student account to avoid any holds and overdue balances will help you just continue to move smoothly through the university system. In the event that you do fall behind, after the first payment deadline in a semester, because payments or billing statements are issued by Student Financial Services, which is a separate central university office, separate from GSAS entirely, that does all tuition and fee billing for the entirety of the university. Student Financial Services would assess a late fee if you have a balance after that first semester's due date, including that $46 student activities fee for the first late due or due date past due. For every billing statement after that, they will apply a 1.5% late fee accruing. So again, just keep up with your balance. Don't ignore the Student Financial Services statements, because even though you're fully funded, if you're receiving that notification, make sure that there's nothing that you are still responsible for paying. And if you have a question about a fee on your account, again, our financial aid liaison or your financial aid liaison is available to help you with that. Now, registration. Tuition fees, including health insurance, are all driven by your registration in what we call an enrollment category. Now, for the first six semesters of your enrollment, you are going to enroll in a full residence unit. And we're going to provide you even with the call number for that, for you to do that later on once registration opens up. You need 2 full residence units to earn the master's degree and 6 for the PhD, which means, again, for the first 6 semesters that you're enrolled, you're going to enroll in this registration category called full residence unit. In future semesters, when you're on your dissertation fellowship, for example, you'll have a different enrollment category, but know for now, for the next 6 semesters, you're going to enroll in this full RU. And if you enroll in courses, but you don't have the RU, you're not really a student yet. This really is the driver. So if you're looking to gain access to your health insurance or the gym, until you have registered for the enrollment category, the university is not recognizing you as a student. You could have 12 credits worth of courses. You are not a student until you have this enrollment category. So make sure that every semester, this is the first thing that you add to your registration. And we send out reminders along with student affairs about registering each semester as you go through the program. But for your own peace of mind, as soon as you get notifications of registration, you should be adding that enrollment category of the RU. And later on, you'll change that, but each semester, this is something that you need to do. So what are your next steps? So what we encourage you to do is complete at least these next 3 things by Friday, August 23rd. And the reason is because these are the things that may prevent you from having registration or would prevent disbursement from occurring of your stipend or your tuition and fees funding. So first is if you have any outstanding holds on your university account, if you previously attended as a master's student or an undergrad at Columbia in any of the schools, and you have an outstanding hold, you will not be able to continue with the registration process until that is cleared. That includes, if you are a new student, the immunization hold. And this is one of the pieces that you can take action now before the big wave of students who are trying to complete this process with our health compliance office prior to the beginning of the semester. The sooner you can get this in and get this resolved, the better off you are. As we get closer to the semester, the processing time for these compliance for immunization can take up to 2 weeks, which means your funding would be delayed for at least 2 weeks until you have been able to clear the immunization hold and register for the enrollment category. So please take a look at those immunization requirements. We've linked you here to the compliance office so that you understand what's required, and do that as soon as possible, but most certainly well in advance of August 23rd if you can. And the next piece is once you've activated your uni, which is part of your new student checklist, you will need to update to have a US address on record as the local address. We would encourage you to have your New York address or local area where you will be living, again, by August 23rd. If you've been living abroad and do not have a US address yet, as soon as you have access to a local address, please make sure to get in and update that. No funding, including stipends for US citizens, is going to be dispersed until there is a US address on file. So you can take a minute to do that while you have time. And as well, you will need to apply for direct deposit. So if you've been, again, living abroad and don't currently have a US bank account, you will need a US bank account to receive any direct deposit. Direct deposit cannot be done to a foreign account. So make sure that you have a US bank account on record and that you update your direct deposit information for the refunds and stipends at this page, which is part of Student Financial Services, and complete that again as soon as possible, but certainly in advance of August 23rd. And that's because the next week is a 3-day window for registration. So this is the earliest period of time when you can register for the fall semester. Registration will be open on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, August 27th through the 29th. When you are logged into SSOL, you will see your registration appointments, that you have them coming up. They are also during specific times of the day. And that is because the registration system is shared by all students at Columbia. And so as to not overload this university registration system, schools have designated times for designated groups of students to complete their registration. So registration is not available before this time and will not be available until, I believe, after September 5th during this period. So make sure that during this Tuesday through Thursday period of time that you are able to add that RU. And we've given you, again, here's the call number on that. Make sure that you're able to add that RU during this 3-day window. That is the only way that we can sort of that's the first opportunity that you're going to have to make sure that your funding can begin the disbursement process. Again, everything is driven by this registration in the enrollment category. So if you don't have that, but you have classes, things will not continue to move through the system. So here's that call number again. This presentation is going to be available once the recording is available on the new student checklist. So you'll be able to see that as well once we get to the next place. Okay. And my PowerPoint froze a little bit. Here we go. So here's just a general overview of the disbursement process. And we're calling it the stipend disbursement process because that's the funding that you're going to get for your living expenses, but your tuition and fees is also part of this disbursement process. So we add your funding to a financial aid system, at which point it's looking to see that you are registered in an enrollment category, that you have your local address on file. You also would need to have direct deposit enrollment, though the funds will move through if you have not set that up. We encourage you to have all of these 4 items completed before the registration or before that 23rd and on the 27th through the 29th when registration opens. Again, clear those holds, any of them that you have in advance. The funds then for your tuition and fees will move to your student account and be applied to cover those charges, with the exception of the charges that are your responsibility. And then the stipend funding is going to transfer from your student account to the accounts payable system in order to be issued as hopefully direct deposit and not a paper check. With direct deposit, after that happens, usually you receive it 3 to 5 business days from the time that it's transferred from your student account to accounts payable. That can be a couple days shorter or longer, depending on your bank's direct deposit receipt system. If you did not sign up for direct deposit and a paper check is issued, it can be at least 2 weeks before you receive those funds. So again, strongly encourage you to have that U.S. account on file and set up direct deposit at your earliest convenience. And the number one reason, again, why funds don't continue to move through this process is because there's no enrollment category set up. So we're going to harp on that a little bit because it's so unusual and students are really used to just registering for the courses that they need rather than this enrollment category. But know that add that as the first part of any semester's registration, and you will be in a better position to get your funding as quickly as possible. Now, based on the timing of registration, as well as the processing times for stipends, we do not anticipate students to receive the stipend funds in their personal accounts via direct deposit earlier than the week of September 9th. That's in part because of the Labor Day holiday as well. It's possible that some students will receive the stipends at the end of that week of Labor Day, but for your own planning and budgeting purposes, I would recommend that you have funding available that lasts you at least through that second week of September to ensure that you have funds available until your funding from us arrives into your personal account. And if you have questions about any of these processes, certainly reach out to us. But this is sort of a general timeline of when you might expect to receive funds, provided that you take all the steps, action steps needed in the timeline that we recommend. Takeaways. So again, take action now on clearing any holds and updating your address and direct deposit so that those are in place well in advance. We do take a look in advance of August to sort of determine who still needs to do that and send reminders. But this is your first reminder that you need to get on top of those things as soon as you can so that they're in place and you don't have to worry about it. And again, when registration opens August 27th through the 29th, add that registration category, the enrollment category of the full RU, so that you are seen as a designated student at GSAS. You also should be adding at least one course, but a little less imperative to do that. And we want you to know that we're here, right? So we're giving you a bit of information now, but please feel free to reach out to your departmental liaison from financial aid, as well as your DAF and DGS throughout the summer. We're happy to help if you are stuck on any process or stuck sort of navigating where things are at Columbia. It's a big place. And we want you to know that there's really a team set here to help you navigate through those things so that you can focus on what you came for, which is your PhD program. And that's all we have in terms of direct information. So we're going to go into a little bit into the Q&A. So in terms of, here we've got a question. Let me pull up the Q&A here. All right. And all right, so let me look through a few of these. So tax reporting procedures, tax withholding for stipends. So as I mentioned earlier in the session, for U.S. citizens and permanent residents, there are no tax withholdings for stipends. And we've linked to that in the session, a website page that has some more information about those responsibilities. But definitely take a look at that. We will have a tax session in the spring that will help you to go through sort of planning for those tax informations. Another question about move-in stipends. I'm wondering if there will be move-in stipends as I'm struggling immensely with the moving cost to New York. So while some departments may offer a moving stipend or a benefit to help with relocation, until you're a registered student, which happens August 27th through 29th, no funding can disperse, even if it's done or wanted as part of a move in. So we cannot disperse any funding from financial aid or any other university sources until you are a registered and active student. That's the threshold. So you won't be able to access any moving funds that your department is providing, except as a reimbursement for those funds. To what extent, if any, can we have employment outside of our normal PhD duties? Can we be a contractor or advisor on a process or a project? So yeah, there are opportunities within the academic year for you to get supplemental income through departmental funds, like you could become a reader or a grader for another course if you are not on appointment. I think students in their first year are encouraged to focus on their academics, but perhaps in your second semester, you should speak with your department to see if there are opportunities. Your DAF and your DGS are going to be your first stop to look at other opportunities. Now, external work, you are encouraged to work no more than 10 hours outside of any appointment time. So again, if you are looking to supplement the funding that you're receiving with other external aid, check with your DGS, check with your DAF, check with your academic advisor on how to ensure that you are in compliance with the requirements within your program on managing both your academic appointment here at Columbia as well as external sources of funding. Let's see, other options. Okay, I think this one's being answered, but let me cover this. Does waiving medical insurance or adding dependents affect the stipend amount? No. It affects the amount that we apply to your student account towards your actual charged health insurance, but it does not change the stipend amount. For those of you who have children under the age of 5, that list of other supplemental sources, additional resources, links you to the child care subsidy. So there is a subsidy, but it is separate. You request it from Student Affairs. It's not part of something automated that we increase your stipend if you have dependents. Another question about tax withholding. How are scholarships distributed? Do we need to set up a U.S. bank account immediately upon our arrival? Yes. If you don't have a U.S. bank account already, certainly set that up as soon as possible for those of you who are U.S. citizens and may have been living abroad. In-school deferment of my undergraduate loans, what's the responsibility of the institution with respect to the student achieving deferment for student loan payments, and how long do you qualify for deferment? So for student loans, it will depend on your lender. If you have federal student loans, once registration is reported sometime in probably mid-September, that's reported to something called the National Student Loan Clearinghouse. Your federal loan service provider would then receive that enrollment information and automatically place your federal loans into an in-school deferment status. When next summer comes around, if you have federal loans, if you are coming straight out of undergrad and currently are in your grace period, when you register in the fall, that grace period will stop and in-school deferment will begin. Next summer, when you are no longer registered full-time, because most of you will not register during the summer, your grace period will restart. But since the summer is only 3 months, it should automatically, again, the following fall, put you into an in-school deferment. If, however, you completed your undergraduate or another master's degree and have already entered repayment on federal loans, then once you begin registration reporting in the fall, mid-September, you would have that in-school deferment happen automatically. So typically you wouldn't have your October payment due, depending on the timing of when your billing is with your servicer. But next spring, what will happen is when you are no longer reported as being a full-time student during the summer, your loans may go into repayment in that summer after a month, for a month or two. You would need to actively reach out to your federal loan servicer to request that the loans stay in a deferment for continuing education or forbearance if they determined you were not eligible during the summer, so that you can forego making those payments on a continuous basis. There is no limit for federal loans on in-school deferment. So while you are enrolled as a full-time student, you won't have any issue. In future years, however, if you take a leave of absence, for example, then you may need to be in touch with your servicer to defer those payments actively, or you will begin repayment. For those of you who have private educational loans, the amount of time that you have to defer loans is dependent on the private lender's policy. So you would need to be in touch with that private lender to determine those deferment processes. For many private lenders, they will offer you a deferment for continuing education and in-school enrollment. However, in many of those cases, it's limited. It is not unlimited like federal loans, and you may have, say, 5 years, which for most of you, hopefully that works out. In some cases, it may be longer or shorter. So for private loans, you need to check directly with your private lender. Let me see if we've got any other questions. More about taxes. Again, we encourage you to take a look at the tax information that we have and to speak with a tax advisor. And I think that's it. Most of these are about that. If you have questions about housing, certainly reach out to us. As you continue through the year, know that we are here and available and, waiting to answer your questions. If you receive external fellowship awards, the first person you should be contacting is your department, and the second person you should be contacting is your financial aid liaison, or better yet, copy us both on an email that you have been awarded an external fellowship. External fellowships, depending on the amount and the timing, do impact your eligibility or impact the source from where your funding is coming, and you do have options on how the external fellowships are treated in some cases. So if you are applying now for external awards and you are the recipient in a future period over the summer, you're notified that you received something for next academic year, please reach out to us as soon as possible so that we can adjust any funding source that you have and make sure that you are covered for the year. I'll take one more look for any other outstanding questions. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up. And I think we're good. All right. So thank you guys for coming. This is, hopefully a good introduction to what action steps you need to take. The session was recorded and it will be posted in the new student checklist. Once all 4 sessions have concluded, probably by the end of next week, we'll send out an announcement just indicating that the recordings and the presentation decks are available so that you have access to all those links. We hope you enjoy a safe holiday next week, and we look forward to welcoming you to Columbia in the fall.